The culinary exchange lab of Station Helion 3 wasn't built for drama. It was a sterile marvel of scientific design, engineered to keep volatile organics, allergenic vapors, and cross-species contaminants firmly under control. Everything was filtered, sealed, and constantly scrubbed by discreet sanitation drones that hummed through the ventilation ducts like nervous bees. For most visitors, it was a place of academic rigor and procedural tedium. Commander Jalen Ward wasn't most visitors. He adjusted the stiff collar of his diplomatic uniform, regretting the third cup of synth caf he'd sipped before docking. It made him jittery in the wrong ways, not nervous, just alert enough to notice how aggressively this place smelled like antiseptic and boiled steel. Jalen stepped into the main gallery behind a four-limbed, amber-scaled guide named Sketh, who introduced him with the kind of ceremonial flourish that made him want to disappear behind his clipboard. Esteemed observers, allow me to present Commander Jalen Ward of Terran Cohort 14 Human Liaison and Culinary Compliance Delegate. Sketh's frilled head crested upward in pride. He is here not to eat but to witness. Jalen offered a polite nod and smile, resisting the urge to joke. Humor didn't always land the same way across species, and he didn't want to start things off by making someone molt. The gathered researchers, a dozen aliens of various forms and configurations, turned to regard him with a mixture of polite interest and thinly veiled apprehension. They were all clad in sealed lab gear, some with face shields, others with flexible rebreathers or fluidic helmets. A few had direct neural uplinks, streaming environmental data to their cortical ports. They were ready for biochemical war. The table between them was an ominous buffet of danger. Sealed containers pulsed faintly with internal shielding, and the digital readouts displayed thermal, radiological, and biochemical values. Jalen barely understood. One of the cases had a radiation warning so intense, he was sure it was illegal on half the moons in the Centauri trade ring. This, intoned the lead researcher, Dr. Vrax, a glistening, hexapodal creature with leaf-like mandibles and a voice like bubbling syrup, is the apex of our joint database. Each sample has been verified as ingestible only by specific physiologies, and lethal to nearly all others. Tier classification denotes hazard levels. Tier 5 is considered a planetary-level contaminant. Jalen made a show of taking notes, though his tablet remained blank. He wasn't a scientist. His role was to represent human dietary customs and ensure Earth didn't end up on some intergalactic quarantine list for seasoning things too aggressively. One tray in particular stood out. It shimmered slightly, as if heat and light twisted around it. A faint waft of something sharp and acidic curled toward him, like if vinegar and ozone had a baby and raised it in battery acid. That, said Vrax, gesturing with a sterilized pointer, is compound ZR5, colloquially called crimson vapor by the Velithi. It has been known to perforate unshielded mucosa within seconds. Not to be touched, inhaled, or even approached without thermal filtration. Smells like Szechuan night at my uncle's, Jalen muttered to himself. What was that, Commander? Vrax tilted its head, translation sphere blinking. Nothing. Just fascinating array. The demonstration proceeded with meticulous detail. Sketh narrated each sample's origin, from the nitrogen-fermented roots of Krelna 9 to the hallucinogenic foam used in Skara rituals. Jalen kept his hands to himself. Until someone forgot to reseal the tray. It was minor, a procedural lapse. A junior technician had moved to scan the sample and been called away mid-task. The protective hood hovered open, and the crimson vapor steamed faintly into the filtered air. Quick question, Jalen said, pointing with the end of his stylus. What does that one taste like? Several heads turned. Vrax's eyes dilated. That is ZR5, Sketh said sharply. Commander, we do not consume the specimens, especially not that one. I get that, but what's the profile? Salty, sweet, acidic, or just pure burn? Pain, said Vrax. It tastes like pain. Jalen raised an eyebrow, then smiled. Like wasabi, then? Nobody laughed. In retrospect, he should have paused, asked twice, waited for someone to shut the tray, but curiosity bloomed before logic kicked in. He stepped forward. Commander Ward, please. Jalen pinched off a minuscule sample between the tongs. Do not ingest that. He popped it into his mouth. The world held its breath. The first second was silence. Then came the alarms. And the screaming. A technician crumpled to the floor in a faint. Environmental shields slammed into place with a bass-heavy hum. Medbots shot out from wall recesses, blaring alerts in 5 languages. Vrax's limbs splayed in horror. Inside the containment bubble, Jalen blinked, chewed slowly, then nodded. Not bad, kinda spicy. A small spark shot from a corner sensor array. Someone screamed in what might have been fury or religious panic. One researcher threw up into a filtration sac. The medbots surrounded Jalen in a perfect sphere, firing scans from every angle. Organ integrity, blood toxicity, internal corrosion, the full suite. Readouts scrolled across dozens of screens. All normal. No hemorrhaging, no necrosis, no cellular apoptosis. Jalen frowned slightly. Do these bots need to be this close? Kinda tickles. Outside the bubble, Vrax was losing composure. He has not perished, it croaked. Confirmed, said Sketh, clutching his datapad. Human vitals stable. Internal temperature elevated by 0.4 Kelvin. No structural damage. How is that possible? Hissed a plant-based researcher, shedding spores in disbelief. That compound can etch titanium. It ignited atmospheric gases on a gas giant. He ate it. Jalen lifted the tray with a shrug. Y'all seriously don't eat this kind of stuff? The translation software rendered his tone as, "Why do you fear pleasure?" A second round of alarms began. Minutes later, Jalen sat in a medical chamber the size of a basketball court, wearing a breathable robe and being monitored by 17 separate sensors. He'd been forcibly hydrated, scanned, and scanned again. His circulatory system had been modeled in virtual space and tested for thermal resistance. "Look, I'm fine," he said again, as a holographic nurse finished a third enzyme panel. "I've eaten hotter wings during playoff season." Dr. Vrax appeared at the door, wearing triple-layer protective plating. "We have reviewed initial data. You remain intact. This should be impossible." Or, Jalen countered, maybe human digestion isn't in your database yet. Sketh stepped beside Vrax, looking haunted. "Commander, we have elevated Earth species to category atypical. There is growing consensus you may be biologically anomalous." "Because I ate spicy food?" "Because you survived ZR-5. He leaned back, exhaling. "Okay, yeah, maybe it was a little warm." In the hallway beyond the medbay, word spread like wildfire. Humans, those unassuming bipeds from Sol 3, had consumed something that made containment suits blister. The phrase biohazard immunity began circulating. And in a darkened chamber, deeper in the station, the council convened. This was not the kind of first impression anyone wanted. The council chamber aboard Station Helion 3 was designed for gravity-neutral species. The floor was a fluid mosaic of pressure-responsive tiles, and the seating hovered or slithered as needed. For Commander Jalen Ward, who preferred chairs that didn't flex like jelly, it was a diplomatic nightmare. He stood in the center of the amphitheater, surrounded by 32 delegates of varying mass, moisture levels, and moral philosophies. Above him, a hologram looped the moment he ate the ZR-5 compound. The footage had already been analyzed, dissected, and rescored with thermal overlays. The dramatic zoom-in on his neutral facial expression hadn't helped. Jalen pointed up toward the projection. "Okay. First of all, that face, that's my trying to be polite in public face, not some kind of immune response." Several counselors made notes, though one cephalid delegate pressed a tentacle to its translator pod and said, "You mean to claim that this was not a mating display?" Jalen blinked. "Absolutely not." A murmur spread through the room as that possibility was discarded. The botanist who had fainted earlier now stood behind a bioscreen, still trembling. "Commander Ward," began Counselor Threll, a gelatinous prism who spoke through synthesized harmonic tones. "The incident has triggered 5 sub-protocols for environmental breach, 4 for interspecies exposure, and 1 for mythological classification. We have not enacted the last one in over a century." Jalen rubbed his temples. "All because I ate 1 bite of overhyped alien salsa." Threll's tones deepened. "It was not intended for ingestion. It was listed in your briefing." "I skimmed the briefing," Jalen admitted. To be fair, most of it was in standard Xenotype 4, and the translator app kept autocorrecting non-edible to non-notable. Counselor Vrax, now recovered and visibly agitated, interjected. We have since reviewed human culinary practices. Your species routinely consumes capsaicin, which in most biologies functions as a neurotoxic deterrent. Your beverages contain acids. Your cheeses are decomposed proteins. You have fermented fish into paste. And sold it to ourselves, Jalen offered. Sometimes at festivals. Another murmur. One delegate began preemptively donning a rebreather. Sketh stepped forward from the wings, holding a digital display of Earth culinary history. Their tolerance thresholds defy standard metabolic gradients. According to this database, the human gastrointestinal tract has evolved to metabolize compounds that provoke violent reactions in all known fauna. A screen lit up, showing images of buffalo wings, habanero peppers, vinegar shots, durian fruit, and something called the One-Chip Challenge. Several delegates recoiled. This is what they eat, voluntarily? Asked a skeletal Silanth ambassador. Sketh nodded grimly. Yes. They even have contests to see who can suffer the most. The cultural terminology is heat tolerance, bragging rights. Jalen lifted a finger. To be fair, most of those contests end in regret. Vrax hissed. You choose suffering as a form of entertainment. Look, spice isn't suffering, it's flavor plus fire. It's the thrill. To you, Sketh said, it's a thrill. To the Velethi, it's a controlled chemical hazard. To the Norak, it's a military-grade decontaminant. You ingested it like it was a snack. Do you not see how this unnerves us? I do now, Jalen admitted, pacing slowly inside the containment circle. The council insisted he remain within. But the real issue here isn't what I ate. It's how little you understand how our bodies process pain and flavor. Threll leaned forward. Explain. Jalen took a breath. Pain, to us, is not always negative. Sometimes it signals growth or challenge. Athletes chase lactic burn. Spicy food triggers a pain response that our brains interpret as pleasure, endorphins, dopamine, that whole cocktail. We evolved that way. It's part biology, part culture. A long pause followed. Then Threll turned to its aides. Begin full review of human neurological reward systems. Vrax glanced around, exasperated. Even if we accept that their internal biochemistry responds differently, it does not negate the fact that ZR5 can disintegrate soft tissue in 94% of known life forms. Sketh raised a hand. There's another concern. After the initial scan, we exposed a fragment of Jalen's saliva sample to ZR5 and observed a neutralizing reaction. Jalen winced. Wait, you're testing my spit now? It altered the compound, Sketh continued. Reduced volatility, dampened acid emissions. It's as if your biochemistry reversed the toxicity. Gasps echoed across the chamber. The implications were seismic. Are you suggesting, Threll said slowly, that humans may not merely tolerate these substances but render them inert? I didn't mean to, Jalen shouted, arms raised. I'm not a bioweapon. I'm a guy with questionable taste buds. A red alert panel lit up near the chamber entrance. A priority dispatch streamed from the culinary exchange lab. Sketh opened the feed and groaned. Jalen recognized the scene instantly. The lab, full of nervous researchers, and a new table of samples. In the center was Jalen's name on a placard. Tasting trial, human subject. What is this? Threll asked sharply. Vrax's fronds wilted. The research team initiated further testing. Jalen's face paled. Oh no. The screen flickered as the camera zoomed in. Several researchers were clustered around a new compound labeled Tier 4, volatile nectar. In the middle, Jalen's recorded voice said, Let's see if this one has a little sweetness. Then he bit in. Jalen buried his face in his hands. I told them not to post the footage. A split second later, on screen, all containment seals engaged, an emergency vent system activated, and 3 researchers leapt behind impact barriers. The visual cut to static. Sketh cleared his throat. The test logs show you describe the compound as like cinnamon if it got into a fight with a chili pepper and lost. One counselor left the chamber entirely. Another whispered into a communicator. The term reactive anomaly appeared on several data pads. Threll's body dimmed as it processed the implications. We may need to reassess humanity's status entirely. Jalen turned, feeling the tension close in. What does that mean? It means, Sketh said carefully, you're on the verge of being declared a Level 3 biological unpredictable. You're not officially a hazard, but you're one lab test away from a mandatory quarantine protocol. Jalen looked between them. You're seriously considering isolating an entire species because one guy couldn't resist a spicy snack? No, Threll corrected. We are considering isolating a species because its members apparently find pleasure in consuming volatile substances that could collapse our digestive ecologies. Vrax stepped forward. We propose a moratorium on human ingestion activities aboard this station until further review. Sketh added, and under no circumstance are you to eat anything without supervision? Jalen exhaled. So, no buffet privileges? Not even chewing gum, Vrax snapped. Great, Jalen muttered. First contact, and I get grounded. As he was escorted from the chamber under light security detail, the term biohazard adjacent floated on the shared network. His diplomatic badge blinked yellow. The culinary lab had turned into a war zone of nervous science. And as the containment protocols ratcheted up, Jalen began to realize something deeply concerning. He wasn't entirely sure what else humans could eat that would break their understanding of biology. He'd only scratched the surface. For the first time in recorded history, Station Helion 3's culinary wing implemented a zero-human protocol. The signs were everywhere. No tasting zones, human entry requires Level 2 monitoring, and the particularly pointed, do not feed the Earthling. Commander Jalen Ward didn't know whether to laugh or feel deeply insulted. He sat at a bench in the observation gallery, beneath a soft, non-conductive heat lamp installed specifically to keep him from thermo-regulating unexpectedly. He stared through the transparency barrier at a small dish of Gravac root compote, a jelly-like concoction whose fumes could dissolve bronze. It jiggled innocently. "You're taunting me," Jalen muttered to the dessert. From his left, Sketh arrived holding a clipboard and a pair of sensor glasses. "The compote does not possess sentience, Commander." "Yeah. Well, it's the only thing that hasn't filed a panic report about me this week." Sketh chittered in sympathy. His scales had lost some of their usual polish, stressed, maybe. "The Council's concerns have escalated, not just about your biology. They're worried your culture encourages reckless ingestion behavior. There's talk of full-spectrum dietary classification." "You mean labeling all of humanity as experimental omnivores?" "Worse, ingestion chaotic." Jalen groaned and leaned back until his head thumped against the padded wall. "That sounds like a fancy way of saying, we eat weird stuff. It implies unpredictability at a biochemical level. That unnerves them." The doors opened across the gallery, revealing Dr. Vrax. He was encased in a newly upgraded isolation suit that emitted a soft hum and had a retractable dome. It looked like something you'd wear while disarming a black hole. "Commander Ward," Vrax intoned, "you are requested in Lab 4B for controlled analysis." Jalen raised an eyebrow. "I thought I was banned from the labs." "Exception granted for supervised exposure under quintuple protocol. We've installed an auto-extinguishing floor system." "Comforting," Jalen said. "Didn't know I was expected to burst into flames." Vrax didn't respond. He floated toward the elevator. Sketh gave Jalen a look somewhere between caution and pity. "Try not to eat anything unless asked." Scout's honor. Scouts don't exist in our interspecies records. Exactly. Lab 4B resembled an operating theater, circular, bright, with more cameras than necessary. In the center was a chair anchored to the floor, surrounded by plexiglass shielding, and flanked by two hovering medbots that looked like judgmental hummingbirds. "This feels a lot like an interrogation," Jalen muttered. Vrax's dome retracted partially. "It is a taste trial." "Right, because those are totally different things." Sketh appeared in the observation booth above, speaking through the intercom. "We've prepared 3 non-lethal compounds derived from shared chemistry ingredients. No ZR5, no active radiotropes." The first dish was brought out on a floating tray, a blue paste with flecks of crystalline sugar. "Dosh, root blend," Sketh explained. Derived from Terran turmeric analogs, but typically used as topical analgesic. Jalen took a sniff. It smelled like a mix of lemongrass and industrial cleaner. He dipped a finger, tasted. A little bitter, but not bad. Warm, like turmeric, but meaner. The sensors blinked wildly. Elevated adrenaline, said one medbot. No tissue damage. Vrax took notes. Proceed to sample 2. This time, the tray contained a gel cube with pulsing bioluminescence. Volak seed infusion, Sketh said, modified for digestive survivability. Jalen hesitated. Looks like radioactive jello. It is not radioactive. He shrugged. Bottoms up. The cube hit his tongue, fizzed, and evaporated instantly. His eyes watered. He coughed once. Okay, that one had some kick. The medbots chirped again. Stomach lining engaged. Core temp plus 1.2 Kelvin. Still fine, Jalen said, dabbing his mouth. Then came the third dish. It was simple. A red sauce in a small metal spoon, hovering in its own containment bubble. No name, no ingredients listed. Just a single note, extracted from pre-human encounter incident on Gerdali Prime, modified for dilution. Sketh's voice crackled. Commander, this is the lowest concentration we could safely produce. Jalen stared. You guys made this? To test on me? Do not ingest, Vrax snapped. Sample only, touch to tongue, no swallowing. Copy that. Jalen reached forward, tapped the spoon to his tongue, and waited. The taste was instant fire, not burn presence. It filled his mouth like a siren. Every nerve shouted, not in pain, but in awareness. A wave of heat rolled down his chest. He exhaled. Now that's flavor. Alarms didn't trigger. No smoke, no heart failure. He licked his lips and smiled. The lab fell into stunned silence. Vrax finally spoke. You should not be conscious. Buddy, Jalen said, wiping his eyes. That tasted like an angry ghost made of horseradish. I've had hotter curry at 3 a.m. Vrax's translator glitched for a moment. Repeat, ghost. Of horseradish? Sketh leaned into the mic. Council is requesting immediate comparative validation. Comparative what now? A second subject. The door opened. An alien technician entered tall, pale, with membrane-lined eyes, nervous, brave, possibly very foolish. This is Learn, Sketh said, volunteering to attempt a 1 microgram exposure of the same compound. Learn sat across from Jalen, visibly trembling. You sure about this? Jalen asked gently. Learn gave a short nod. For science. And treaty clarity. The spoon hovered to Learn's tongue. Instantly, his face contracted, his eyes widened, then rolled back. He let out a strangled wheeze, clutched his throat, and collapsed into a chair where a crash harness auto-deployed. Emergency deactivation, Vrax bellowed. Medical bots swarmed in. Jalen stood, but Sketh's voice cut through. He'll live. Minor synaptic overstimulation, short-term paralysis. Jalen winced. Was it something I said? Commander, Vrax hissed, we have now confirmed your biology reacts oppositely to extreme compounds. Oppositely? To survive, your system appears to convert perceived biochemical threats into reward stimuli. You enjoy what others experience as assault. Sketh added quietly, this may not be unique to you. Jalen blinked. You mean, other humans could be like this? We suspect variants across individuals, but yes. Vrax turned to the glass. We must inform the council. Jalen leaned against the rail. So, what now? You slap a warning sticker on us? Caution, may consume the impossible? Sketh didn't laugh. That's under consideration. Later that evening, Jalen sat in his quarters, staring at his meal. Plain station rations, tasteless and beige. His stomach growled with boredom. The door chimed. Sketh entered, holding a sealed container. From the lab. Under protocol. One-time sample. You've earned it. Inside was a small, bright red cube. ZR5's cousin, barely legal, not entirely safe. Jalen stared at it like an old friend. You're trusting me? No, Sketh said, but we've learned that supervision is more realistic than prohibition. Jalen grinned. He popped it into his mouth. It hit him like a slow-motion firework flavor. Heat, a burst of something ancestral and wild. He sat back, eyes watering, grinning stupidly. Still got it, he wheezed. Sketh sat beside him. There's talk that humanity might destabilize cross-species culinary research forever. Jalen shrugged. Or expand it. A silence passed between them, not uncomfortable, just filled with the potential of things yet to come. And faintly, from the vents above, one researcher's voice echoed in horror. He's metabolizing it, with joy. 3 days after the Cube incident, as it was now called, the Council of Helion 3 reconvened in emergency diplomatic formation, a status usually reserved for biological outbreaks, gravity collapses, or the time a Gorgothi ambassador attempted to marry the station's reactor core. Commander Jalen Ward stood once more in the center of the chamber, but this time, he wasn't alone. To his left was Dr. Vrax, stiff and glistening in ceremonial bioarmor. To his right, Sketh hovered with the mild twitch of a creature trying very hard not to twitch. Behind them stood 2 medical attendants, a hazard monitoring drone, and one unconscious researcher still recovering from the ill-advised microdose of volatile nectar. Let the record show, began Counselor Threll, its gelatinous core humming with resonance, that no further ingestion events have occurred in the past 72 hours. No uncontained reactions, no breaches, and no metaphysical awakenings. Happy to keep my soul intact, Jalen said with a slight wave. No one laughed. Counselor Rin, a crystalline being whose facets changed color with its emotional state, flickered an anxious amber. However, the psychological damage has already rippled across departments. The digestive trauma observed in the volunteer, Learn has incited multiple ethics reviews. He volunteered, Jalen said. Which raises further concerns, Rin countered. Why did your presence inspire him to take such a risk? Jalen looked to Sketh. He wanted to understand, Sketh offered. That's not Jalen's fault. Understanding, Vrax muttered, should not involve consuming thermochemical plasma food. Let's talk about understanding, Jalen said, stepping forward. Because that's what this all comes down to, right? You didn't expect humans to be this weird. But here we are. Several counselors leaned back as he approached the rail. I didn't mean to cause chaos. Honestly, I was trying not to touch anything. But our species didn't evolve around caution. We evolved around adaptation, challenge, curiosity. Sometimes that looks reckless to you, but that's how we made it off our planet. Threll's outer ring pulsed. And by it, you mean? Every stupid thing we eat, every terrifying flavor we try, just to see what happens. The pepper that makes your ears sweat, the fish that almost poisons you if prepared wrong, the powder that makes your face melt into a new dimension. Counselor Rin turned slightly translucent. You describe these with fondness? Sure, Jalen said, because food, for us, isn't just survival. It's a challenge, a tradition, a story. We don't eat just to stay alive. We eat to feel alive. Sketh, almost despite himself, nodded. And to compete, apparently. Oh yeah, you haven't lived until you've seen 2 grown adults cry over a bowl of wings and still refuse to admit defeat. A murmur of confused horror spread through the chamber. Which brings us to the matter of classification, said Threll. After considerable debate, the council has proposed the following resolution. The lights dimmed slightly as a holo display formed above the chamber. It read, Homo sapiens, biologically unpredictable, level 3. Subject to culinary containment, may trigger environmental hazard responses, approved for monitored cultural exchange, consumption activities restricted to authorized zones, no open buffets. Jalen frowned. Wait, we're level 3? Vrax spoke carefully. Levels are not sequential in severity, merely indicators of variance from metabolic expectations. Sketh added, You're below level 2 explosive fungal spores, but above the sentient pollen crisis of Vela 6. Not exactly a comfort, Jalen muttered. Another section of the display appeared. Cultural clause, experimental ingestion, diplomacy. In recognition of humanity's unique relationship with biochemical stimuli, the Council authorizes limited participation in controlled culinary demonstrations, under supervision. Jalen blinked. You're creating a job for this? Technically, said Threll, we're creating a warning label with diplomatic clearance. Vrax stepped forward. However, we require evidence that your species can approach this responsibility with care. Jalen perked up. You want a demonstration? The chamber groaned in unison. Lab 4B had been reconfigured again. This time, it featured a half-ring of seats for council members, a neutral taste buffer field, and 5 meticulously selected compounds spanning multiple cultural tolerances. None were lethal. Some were spicy. One, Jalen noted, had a skull and wrench symbol with the subtext, mildly alarming. Commander, Sketh said, handing him a sealed spoon, you are cleared to begin. Council observation only. No audience broadcast. Jalen gave a thumbs up and took his place at the table. He started with the pale green paste, a blend of algae and iron spores, used by the intraquel for mid-molt transitions. It tasted like wet cardboard with ambition. Next, a sharp citrus oil from the Lyric system. It made his nose run and his brain tingle, but in a fun way. Third, a cube that fizzed on his tongue and left a feeling like static electricity had kissed his teeth. He paused at the fourth, a transparent shard of infused crystal. This one's just for shimmer, right? Sketh nodded. Flavorless, but it triggers light in your vision cortex. Jalen chewed. Instantly, the world shimmered in pink and gold hues. Okay, that's kinda trippy. Final sample, Vrax said, barely containing his dread. Jalen took the spoon. Red, bright, angry, not ZR5, but definitely its cousin. He took the bite. Heat spread through him like a song, not painful, more like a vibrant hum under his skin. It made him blink hard and grin like a lunatic. He breathed out. Now that is flavor. A pause. Then, unexpectedly, clapping. Well, the alien version of it. Pulsing light, clicking tendrils, humming vibrations, and one enthusiastic ooze that rolled itself into a celebratory spiral. Threll's voice resonated. Commander Ward, your species may be hazardous but not hostile. Jalen gave a seated bow. We're just spicy. 2 weeks later, the Interstellar Bulletin carried the update. Humanity reclassified. Not dangerous, just deeply strange. Further culinary exchanges to be handled by trained liaisons. One Commander Jalen Ward, assigned as Earth's first ingestion ambassador. He had a badge now, a real one. Holographic, with a chili pepper icon and a flame behind it. It wasn't official protocol, but the design had. Stuck. Sketh met him outside Lab 3A with a new data pad. Next tour is Varnak 5. They have a friction fruit you're supposed to try. Is it edible? For them, no.